still running in the zones beyond me. Especially with the way you drive it.
Pacific Drive is a smaller budget independent game that dropped in early 2024 for the PC and PS5. It went on to review well, earning itself a strong recommendation on OpenCritic and receiving plenty of nods at various game awards. Developer Ironwood Studio has delivered a number of updates in the year since it launched, including some free content. I wouldn't say that this has done a No Man's Sky transformation on it, but it certainly has improved the core experience and provided more game for those who want it. Pacific Drive is a hard game to describe. It's a game that you can spend 20-something hours with if you just want to see the story through to its conclusion, or 50+ hours to fully explore every location and max out the crafting system. It's essentially a game about driving a shitbox around the countryside, albeit a very messed up countryside. There's definitely a lot more to it than that, but yeah, you will spend a lot of time driving around and exploring, and it certainly can be monotonous at times. I really enjoyed some parts of it, and I find the central gameplay loop mesmerizing, but I ultimately have mixed feelings about it. Incredibly mixed, you might say. So in this re-review, I'm going to do my best to explain what it is, how it's evolved since launch, and if it's a better game now. This is also going to be a bit of a counter-narrative to the glowing critical reviews. I do think for some people this will be a Game of the Year contender, but for an equal if not larger group, I think it will be an exercise in frustration. Finally, before we get started, for anyone new to these re-reviews wondering what's the deal, I create these videos because modern games rarely ship in complete or polished states. Reviews that drop at launch are often based on a version of the game that is missing features, modes, and/or has major technical issues. Games almost always receive updates post-launch, and over time these can change them, radically in some cases, to become better experiences. And Pacific Drive is no different. I almost gave up on it about halfway through, and one of the recent updates provided just enough incentive to keep going. Okay, that's enough of a prologue, let's do it. First things first, let's talk about the updates and the key improvements since launch. So, most of the early updates focused on bug fixes and improving performance across all platforms. Probably the most interesting change included in these updates was the various framerate caps added for PC. There were a handful of other minor additions such as cosmetics and quality of life improvements in the early updates, but it's not until 1.6.2 that the game started to see some significant content changes. This update, called the Dumpsters, DSLRs and Drives update, added a photo mode and a performance mode for the PS5. It included new garage upgrades too that help with inventory and resource management, and it fleshes out the world with new points of interest and environmental details. The Drive Your Way update added new cosmetic customization options for your garage, as well as difficulty presets and customizable settings. These let you fine-tune the experience with specific toggles for things like resource availability and how much damage you take. The Trips and Treasures update was pretty substantial. It upgraded the game to Unreal Engine 4.27. On top of this, it included even more garage customization options, challenges, and additional deep zone maps. The largest and most recent update is called the Endless Expeditions update, and I reckon this is the most important. This update introduced a number of new things, but the biggest was the new survival mode. This offers up single-serving exploration journeys with a twist. You can no longer stock up on items before you leave the garage. Everything has to be crafted out in the field. The difficulty is jacked up, and there's a few new anomalies to deal with, and things get progressively more and more unstable the longer you stay in the field. This is clearly a mode devoted to the endgame, for players wanting more game and more challenge, but you can tackle these missions anytime you want. The other huge change in this update, at least from my perspective, is the ability to suspend your run. In other words, you can save your game mid-journey. You still can't return to the garage mid-journey without severe punishment, but being able to call time on a trip and return to it later is a godsend. So yeah, the game has seen some big changes that make it play better, with new options allowing you to customize your experience, and additional content for people who want to keep playing long after the credits have rolled. Pacific Drive is a survival game. It has an element of mystery, and there are moments that some people might find creepy or spooky, but overall this isn't a horror game. The bulk of the gameplay has you exploring randomly generated locations in your station wagon, scavenging for resources and trying to figure out what's going on. I've used the word random instead of procedural because it's not technically procedurally generated. Each location is different on subsequent visits though, giving it near endless replayability. It has a story that's delivered through radio chatter and audio logs. It takes place in a walled-off area called the Olympic Exclusion Zone. Inside the zone is a failed government science experiment that's created strange phenomena called anomalies and some pretty unpredictable weather. How or why you ended up in the zone isn't described in much detail. Your goal is to gather resources to pimp your ride so that you can make the dangerous journey to the center of the zone and finally escape. You receive help from a handful of scientists who've remained in the zone. Although you're in constant contact with your allies, you never actually see them. So the closest thing you have to a companion is this beat up old car, and as a result it can be quite a lonely experience. I also found it hard to pay attention to the story because a lot of it is delivered while you're out in the field, trying to dodge anomalies, radiation, and the crazy ass weather. The voice acting is top notch and the writing is sharp and witty, it's just difficult to follow when you've got a floating blob stealing panels off your ride. Although Pacific Drive has seen numerous updates that improve the gameplay, the story and how the events unfold has remained the same. The expeditions, added in the Endless Expeditions update, do add some extra lore, but if you were hoping for more story, like an expansion, you're out of luck. The core focus of the gameplay is maintaining and upgrading your car. The main things you'll need to consider are its storage capacity, toughness, and its range, but there are a myriad of other modifications you can do to it that alter its capabilities. Managing your inventory is another central task, and you'll need to strike a balance between upgrading and repairing things. Crafting tools to help you scavenge and make repairs is another thing you'll spend a lot of time doing. Additionally, you'll need to be cognizant of what items you'll need when out in the field, and this will change depending on the location and conditions. If this sounds like a shitload of busy work, then I can 100% guarantee you'll be bored to tears within the first couple of hours. I, on the other hand, love this. I loved exploring each location and figuring out how to become more efficient in resource gathering. I especially love taking the time after a long journey to make repairs and upgrading my ride. It's the IKEA effect on steroids, but without any of the pain of visiting an IKEA. This is a very slow-paced game. Resource gathering and exploration makes up a large part of it, but there's almost an equal amount of downtime devoted to fixing, crafting, upgrading, and planning. The learning curve is steep too, which makes the first few hours drag. The main complaint I have with learning how everything works is the horrendous UI. On one hand, it makes sense within the context of the game. This isn't some super slick operation, it's a dodgy garage job. On the other hand, I think there would have been a way of making these interfaces more intuitive, while retaining the hand-built aesthetic. I lost count of the number of times I had to ask ChatGPT basic stuff like how does the Tinker Station work or how do I fix a broken headlight. The game does kind of explain most things if you hunt through the menus, but not in a lot of detail, and some of it is delivered through radio chatter that's easy to miss. It also doesn't do a great job of explaining some core concepts. So, for example, I didn't realize the importance of analyzing anomalies until about 6 hours in, and you need to do this in order to unlock stuff. Another thing worth knowing, which I found out about the hard way, is that some destinations are a dead end, and if you travel there, you're essentially fucked. So you really need to pay attention early on. Prior to the April update, I wrote a whole angry section about how brutally punishing this game is, and how losing hours of your progress completely ruins it. While the post-launch updates have reduced this pain in various ways, I gotta stress, it's still possible to lose a ton of progress for reasons that don't feel justified. If things go tits up and you die out in the field, you'll be transported back to the garage, losing all of your resources and with a car that's likely in need of significant repairs. This not only means that any time spent on that journey was wasted, additionally, you'll need to invest more time to get your vehicle and supplies back to the level they were before. Pausing mid-journey doesn't prevent you from losing progress, but it does provide just enough respite, and I commend Ironwood Studios for recognizing this pain point. So, while Pacific Drive can be punishing, abstruse in the way it communicates its objectives, and in desperate need of a UI designer's touch, my details are in the description, it no longer requires hours of uninterrupted play. And I think for most people like me who can't commit to long gaming sessions, especially without warning, this makes it far more accessible. As far as your options for playing it go, you've got the PC, the PS5, and you've got the PS5 Pro now. The base PS5 by default runs at 4K and is capped at 30 frames per second. There's a performance mode now that increases the frame rate, which I'm guessing is targeting 60, but this is only a guess as Ironwood Studios haven't provided any official numbers. Resolution takes a hit in this mode, but again, I'm not exactly sure what it is. Now, unfortunately, I came across a number of game-breaking bugs on the base PS5. There's a pretty common issue which stops your R2 button from working. This is kind of important because you need it to perform critical actions like collecting resources. I had one instance where mission markers didn't appear on my map, requiring me to search YouTube for a Let's Play to figure out where to go. Things not loading is another common one. I upgraded my backpack, for example, and when I checked my inventory, there was nothing there. Like, literally nothing. All of these issues were fixed by relaunching the game, but if you're out in the field, this isn't always an option. I played most of the game using the performance mode, and the performance is anything but locked. There were a handful of instances where the frame rate tanked really hard, and sometimes it dips in situations that don't make a lot of sense, like moving around in the garage. The PS5 Pro can, unsurprisingly, run the game with the higher frame rate and resolution. I haven't personally tested this version, but it stands to reason that performance is likely to be more stable on the Pro. It also has a 120Hz option if you have a display capable of high refresh rates. The PC has access to much higher resolutions and frame rates. I also think that this is probably best played with a keyboard and mouse, which you can do on a PS5, but obviously it's the native experience on a PC. There doesn't seem to be a huge difference between the platforms when looking purely at visuals, and less high pixel counts is something you can't live without. That said, the number of bugs and performance issues that I experienced on PlayStation are enough for me to suggest that maybe PC is the optimal platform to play on.
The sector stabilizers are fully operational. You've got a straight shot toward the expansion wall. One more thing. You may want to consider armoring up a bit. Once you cross that wall, the mid-zone is another beast altogether.
I think this is a far more polarizing game than many of the critics described. For the survival enthusiast, I reckon it will likely satisfy in a similar way to games like Subnautica and No Man's Sky. The crafting, resource management, exploration, and sense of achievement from taking big risks is superb. If you don't enjoy these types of games though, and/or games which obfuscate the objective, this is likely to be a slow and frustrating grind. The game features numerous systems and concepts, many of which are poorly explained. This demands that you try everything until you find the correct solution, which might be the secret sauce for some, but for me, it's why I find games like Observation and the FromSoft games so tedious. I need to feel like time spent in a game equals some kind of progress. It doesn't have to be much, just a small amount of forward momentum, and struggling to understand where to go and what to do is not my idea of a fun time. In the end, Pacific Drive is a roller coaster of emotions. The highs will have you fist pumping the air, and the lows will have you pile driving your controller into the coffee table. It's an experience where your level of enjoyment will heavily depend on how much you enjoy the moment-to-moment gameplay. If you're not interested in hours of exploration, crafting, resource management, and equipment maintenance, and don't have a high tolerance for setbacks, then I think you'll find the pockets of story in between insufficient. For these reasons, and due to there being some super annoying technical issues, it's a difficult game for me to recommend to anyone but the survival game enthusiast. It's a better game now than at launch for sure, although for me, it wasn't enough. As much as I enjoyed the first 10 to 15 hours, I ultimately found it to be quite exhausting, and at the 25-hour mark, I'd had enough. I wasn't invested in the story, and I didn't have the strength to see it through to its conclusion.